In turn, I am very appreciative of being able to participate in this series of faculty lectures, which Professor Galino has arranged with the same grace and expedition we've come to admire in all of his many activities. I shall avoid in introduction making the customary disclaimer of my qualifications to present a lecture on the topic of this evening's discussion, with the feeling that my succeeding presentation will itself, without any further support on my part, make this disqualification apparent. And go directly to the topic of the evening. And in discussing education and integration with you, I want to place emphasis throughout upon the field of higher education, which may not so far have received appropriate attention in this emancipation anniversary year. And because this is the emancipation centenary, I want to place emphasis upon higher education for the Negro American. Though it will be understood, many remarks and recommendations concerning this ethnic minority group may be applicable as well to the Mexican American and to other ethnic minority members of our community. First, what is our community from a population point of view? In round numbers, the 1960 U.S. Census counted 6 million people in Los Angeles County, of which 1.5 million, 1/4 or 25% of the total, represented ethnic minority groups. These included approximately 600,000 Mexican Americans, 500,000 Negro Americans, and 100,000 Japanese and other Asian Americans. These regional figures for Los Angeles County are thus in accord with other 1960 census figures, indicating that the Mexican Americans constitute about 10% of the total population of California and form the largest minority group within the state. Further, the 18 million Negro Americans throughout this country form almost exactly 10% of the total population of 180 million people in the United States today. Collectively, this 18 million Negro Americans in our country form a group about as large, then, as the total population of California, one larger than the total population of Canada, or of any country of Latin America, except Mexico, Argentina, or Brazil, or of any country in Africa, except Egypt, Ethiopia, or Nigeria. Recent socioeconomic estimates indicate that the average income of the U.S. Negro family is only 55%, or about half as much as that of the average white family. And this despite the fact that the Negro family averages 20% larger. In California, the situation is somewhat better, for the median income of the white male in 1959 was $5,000, and of the Negro male, $3,500, or 70% of that of the white. Nonetheless, the collective total of what is sometimes called the Negro market in this country amounts to a significant figure estimated between $15 and $20 billion per year. In establishing this market, three general categories of employment of Negro Americans may be differentiated throughout this country. First is a large base of service laborer employment, accounting for half or more employed, depending on the region. In California, this is true only for Negro women, for but 18% of Negro men are in the service laborer category in our state. Second is a smaller, intermediate-range fraction of vocational operating type, accounting for between a quarter to a third of those employed. Third and last is an exceedingly small segment of professional specialist type at the top, accounting for but 3 to 6 or 9%, depending on the region of the country and the group. In California, for example, the State Department of Industrial Relations has reported 4.4% of male Negro Californians are in the professional or specialist fields, as compared with 14% of whites. This stratification of Negro employment into the three categories of a large laboring, an intermediate vocational, and a small specialist and professional group can be related to, and indeed is an expression of, the three stages of development through which education of the Negro American has progressed historically in this country. The first of these, in the pre-emancipation era, was associated with concepts of uneducability of the American Negro and was designed primarily to train the muscles of his back. The second, gaining full-scale stature in the second quarter century of the emancipation period, was described then as the industrial education of the Negro and would today be termed vocational education, and was designed to train his hands. The third stage, beginning in the Negro colleges of the South just a quarter century ago, and which is still in a period of expanding opportunity, is providing higher education for the Negro American and is thus designed to train his mind and brain. These stages at the same time form successive steps in the progressive desegregation in higher education for Negro Americans in this country over the past century. First, as to the era of uneducability. The formal education of the American Negro may properly be said to have begun during the period of the Reconstruction. Despite the slaveholders' strongly asserted belief in Negro uneducability, they demonstrated a real lack of faith in their assertion by making laws to prevent slaves from acquiring the knowledge which it was asserted they were mentally incapable of obtaining. At the time of the Emancipation Proclamation, every Southern state had laws which prohibited the instruction of slaves. In some of them, even the instruction of free persons of color was forbidden by law, and some northern states additionally were not wholly friendly to the idea of Negro education. These restrictive measures were so effective in limiting the education of Negroes that only a small number could read and write at the time of the Emancipation Proclamation. It is possible that emancipation found not more than 5% of all the Negroes literate. What of this concept of uneducability for the Negro American? Montague Cobb, professor of anatomy and anthropology at Howard, states, "If every citizen were made to realize that modern man has, for the past 150,000 years at least, had the same size, shape, and capacity of brain he has today, and that only during the last 10 or 15,000 of these years has he used that brain to develop anything like a civilization, and that only during the last 2,000 or 3,000 years have those discoveries been made which make possible Western culture, then he might come to see that the present circumstances of different groups of his fellow men were the product of something other than divine ordination or genetic determination." Passamanic at Ohio State, who has made extensive investigation of school retardation in Negro children, states in a recent paper, "It is now possible to entertain a tabula rasa theory, which proposes that except for a few quite rare hereditary neurological defects resulting in mental deficiency, at conception individuals are quite alike and become different consequent to their experience." Professor Bond, in education at Atlanta University, states, "In standard tests of mental ability, the Negro student's performance is shown to be greatly inferior to students enrolled in American colleges generally. All the studies show that Negro children tend to make lower scores in achievement as in intelligent tests. But when group equivalents in intelligence and socioeconomic status are compared, differences tend to disappear and might be described as functions of an American caste system. In tests of the achievement of Negro school children, degrees of retardation followed the pattern of the general social and economic advancement of the country, and so provided explanation of racial differences as environmentally induced. In the work of Professor Noel Jones, now chairman of the Department of Psychology here at UCLA, undertaken when he was at the University of Alabama, he states, Our results cannot be interpreted as indicating any innately slow rate of mental development in the Negro child. As far as the quantitative and the qualitative results which we've obtained are concerned, the differences are genuinely small. In view of the work in other fields of mental ability, we are inclined to consider any natural difference as slight or non-existent. Certainly, similarities outweigh differences, and the differences which do exist are not too large to be explained very readily on environmental grounds, especially when such grounds so abundantly exist. So much, then, for the era of uneducability. Next, we should move to the development and flourishing of the period of Negro industrial education. Some 60 years ago, that is, around the turn of the century, there ranged in Negro educational circles what was known as the Washington-Du Bois controversy. Washington proposed the industrial education of the Negro with special attention to the education of the masses for self-sustenance. Du Bois argued that emphasis should be placed instead upon the education of what he called the talented tenth of the race, since, in his opinion, the progress of any group stemmed principally from its leaders, distinguished in ability and training. To explore more fully Washington's ideas, in his autobiography, he's describing the beginnings of the development of Negro industrial education concepts, and more particularly as these were worked out in Tuskegee Institute, of which he was the director. After discussing a number of features, he says, aside from this, we wanted to give them, the students, such a practical knowledge of some one industry, together with the spirit of industry, thrift, and economy, that they would be sure of knowing how to make a living after they had left us. We wanted to teach them to study actual things instead of mere books alone. We found that most of our students came from the country districts, where agriculture, in some form or other, was the main dependence of the people. We learned that about 85% of the colored people in the Gulf states depended upon agriculture for their living. Since this was true, we wanted to be careful not to educate our students out of sympathy with agricultural life, so that they would be attracted from the country to the cities and yield to the temptation of trying to live by their wits. We wanted to give them such an education as would fit a large proportion of them to be teachers, and at the same time cause them to return to the plantation districts and show the people there how to put new energy and new ideas into farming, as well as into the intellectual and moral and religious life of the people. And it was on this plan and point of view that Booker T. Washington, president of the Tuskegee Normal and Industrial Institute, began this era of Negro industrial education. At the same time, he moved into a leadership position in the Negro American representation in our country, and most particularly gained this stature in a speech which he had been invited to present at the Atlanta Exposition of 1895. In his autobiography, he quotes the report telegraphed to one of the Boston newspapers of this stirring event and presentation. I quote from it since it describes Booker T. Washington's appearance by saying, "There was a remarkable figure, tall, bony, straight as a Sioux chief, a high forehead, straight nose, heavy jaws, and strong, determined mouth, with big white teeth, piercing eyes, and a commanding manner. The sinews stood out on his bronzed neck, and his muscular right arm swung high in the air, with a lead pencil grasped in the clenched brown fist. His big feet were planted squarely, with the heels together and the toes turned out. His voice rang out clear and true, and he paused impressively as he made each point. Within 10 minutes, the multitude was in an uproar of enthusiasm. Handkerchiefs were waved, canes were flourished, hats were tossed in the air. The fairest women of Georgia stood up and cheered. It was as if the orator had bewitched them. And when he held his dusky hand high above his head, with the fingers stretched wide apart, and said to the white people of the South on behalf of his race, quote, "In all things that are purely social, we can be as separate as the fingers, yet one as the hand in all things essential to mutual progress," the great wave of sound dashed itself against the walls, and the whole audience was on its feet in a delirium of applause. So much then for the period of this Negro industrial education which Du Bois began, which Booker Washington began. At the same time, contemporaries, William Du Bois formed, as has been mentioned, an opponent, an opposing view to this development. Though nominally a debate over educational systems, the Washington-Du Bois controversy actually arose from Du Bois' attack on Washington's whole program. Washington focused on the Negro masses. He favored industrial education because he thought that technical skills would make Negroes invaluable and therefore welcome in an industrial economy. In seeking support for industrial education, Washington was willing to postpone political and social rights, and in appealing to white philanthropy, he maintained a friendly, accommodating attitude toward white men, Southerners and Northerners alike. He felt that the temporary suspension of political and social rights was not too high a price for the attainment of this economic shelf. In contrary view, the case for higher education for the talented 10th was stated by Du Bois, a graduate of Fisk University in Nashville, who went on to receive his doctorate from Harvard in 1895 and subsequently spent a couple of years of postdoctoral study at the universities in Germany. Du Bois stated, "The Negro race, like all races, is going to be saved by its exceptional men. The problem of education, then, among Negroes must first of all deal with the talented 10th, It is the problem of developing the intellect of this race that they may guide the mass away from the contamination and death of the worst in their own and other races. Now, the training of men is a difficult and intricate task. Its techniques are a matter for educational experts, but its object is the vision of seers. If we make money the object of man training, we shall develop money makers, but not necessarily men. If we make technical skill the object of education, we may possess artisans, but not in nature men. Men we shall have only as we make manhood the object of the work of the schools. Intelligence, broad sympathy, knowledge of the world that was and is, and of the relation of men to it. This is the curriculum of that higher education which must underlie true life. And he goes on, so far as Mr. Washington preaches thrift, patient, and industrial training for the masses, we must hold up his hand and strive with him, rejoicing in his honors and glorying in the strength of this Joshua, called of God and of man to lead the headless host. But so far as Mr. Washington apologizes for injustice, north or south, does not rightly value the privilege and duty of voting, belittles the emasculating effect of caste distinction, and opposes the higher training and ambition of our brightest minds, so far as he, the South, or the nation does this, we must unceasingly and firmly oppose them. Behind this conflict in ideas were two quite discordant personalities. Both possessed titanic ambition. Washington, thick-set and slow-moving, had the assurance of a self-trained man, a shrewd, calculating judge of people. He had the soft speech and the accommodating manner that made him equally at home among sharecroppers and at the president's table. A master of equivocation, he made platitudes paths as earthy wisdom, and he could take back unnoticed with one hand what he had given with the other. Du Bois, slight, nervous in his movements, never forgot for a moment his educational background. Proud and outspoken, he held aloof from the Negro masses, but felt at home with a small company of his peers with whom he could be witty and convivial. Washington had the appearance of a sturdy farmer in his Sunday best. Du Bois, with his well-trimmed goatee, looked like a Spanish aristocrat. And this movement, which he inaugurated, could perhaps best be called the era of equality in public education. As Booker T. Washington symbolized the era of education for utility, his major educational antagonist, Du Bois, may be thought of as symbolizing this era of education for equality. And in this, the Negro found a formidable ally in the Constitution and the judiciary, and especially in the United States Supreme Court. Its first far-reaching decision of educational consequences was the case of Lloyd Gaines relating to the University of Missouri, decided in 1938, in which the United States Supreme Court held that a state which provided racially separate schools must provide within its borders an educational opportunity for Negroes equal to that provided by the state for white students. As the Negroes began to demand implementation of this decision by applying to the white state universities for graduate and professional work, the states, in order to preclude admission, gradually instituted graduate and professional education programs in the Negro state colleges. Today, the National Urban League estimates that of the country's 175,000 Negro college students, 85,000, or 50%, attend predominantly Negro institutions, and as many as two-thirds of the total attend Southern institutions. 6 institutions known for their strength in graduate and professional training are today Howard University in Washington, Atlanta University, Texas Southern in Houston, Fisk in Nashville, Morgan State in Baltimore, and Texas Agricultural and Industrial in Nashville. That outstanding educational journal, Time Magazine, ranked Howard, Fisk, and Atlanta recently as the top 3 schools, with Tuskegee and Hampton Institutes next. With an endowment of $19 million, Hampton is the richest Negro institution today. 32 of the strongest private Negro schools in the South now belong to the United Negro College Fund. Last year, $2.25 million was contributed to this fund, less than many single Ivy League institutions raise each year. Divided among 32 schools, the average support per school amounted to about $70,000, and it appears evident then that by itself the Negro community lacks the economic ability to support its higher education programs adequately. It is pleasant to observe that the Ford Foundation has this summer announced that it will provide $15 million to help strengthen Negro colleges. Of the total, $5 million will go to the United Negro College Fund for its campaign for building and other capital improvements, and $10 million will go to a small number of private Negro liberal arts colleges that are members of the fund to be selected over the next year on the basis of their academic quality and performance and their future promise. Most recently, passing from this era, this stage of separate but equal, the Supreme Court foreshadowed the end of segregation when it held in 1950 in the Heman Sweat case that a Negro student had to be admitted to the University of Texas Law School, since a newly established law school for Negroes could not provide substantial equality in such matters as the reputation of the faculty, experience of the administration, position and influence of the alumni, standing in the community, traditions, and prestige. Finally, on May 17, 1954, not quite 10 years ago, the court unanimously concluded that in the field of public education, the doctrine of separate but equal has no place. Separate educational facilities are inherently unequal. It seems to me that the educational system which has been developed over this last decade within California provides an excellent pattern which would satisfy this last decision. For the master plan for higher education in California, providing as it does a sequential series of institutions, each with successively more advanced programs of education, recapitulates in a way the stages of development of education for the Negro American over the past 100 years. As you know, the components of this master plan for public-supported higher education in California consist of the junior colleges, the state colleges, and the University of California. The junior colleges accept all graduates from the secondary school system into two programs of education, each 2 years long. The first of these is a terminal vocational program, and the second is a transfer academic one. For students graduating with a 2.0 grade point average, they are eligible for admission to the state colleges, which can also admit the upper third of graduates directly from the high school. The state college program, as you know, is a 4-year one leading to the bachelor's degree, with all who receive the bachelor's eligible for continuing in a graduate program with no minimum grade point requisite to the master's degree. The upper eighth of the high school population are eligible for admission directly to the University of California system within our state. Junior college transfers with a 2.4 grade average can transfer to the university. State college graduates can transfer to it. And anyone with a bachelor's degree and a grade point average of 3.0, that is to say a B average, can enter graduate or is eligible to enter graduate and professional training within the University of California. It seems to me then that we have in our master plan for higher education within California developed in the last decade, and of course the component units of this have been developing over a much longer period of time, the kind of pattern of state-supported, public-supported higher education which exemplifies this most recent decision of our Supreme Court in this country. Furthermore, it appears to me that the recent developments in science and technology in our country provide, in combination with this master plan for higher education in our state, a great opportunity for the continuing education for graduate and professional degrees for the Negro American ethnic minority group. The most recent support of the President's Scientific Advisory Committee, titled Meeting Manpower Needs in Science and Technology, points to the necessity for doubling the output of PhDs in the next 10 years from a current 3,500 to 7,000 annually, and more than doubling the Master Awards degrees in the sciences, mathematics, and engineering from a current 13,000 per year to a 30,000 per year figure. I mention this report and this situation because too many minority group members assume that their employment opportunities are related in higher education only to teaching or to government service and as a group, Negro Americans account for some 13% of the federal government payroll. But in his studies of Negro engineers, a recent student, Keel, has noted that employers stressed their lack of discriminating employment policies and also the lack of Negroes among engineering applicants. And he concludes, today, Negro youth who have the interest and aptitude should be encouraged to prepare for an engineering career. Adequate training and employment opportunities are available in many places throughout the country. The number of minority group engineers in this country has grown from 2,500 in 1950 to 11,000 in 1960. Howard University in Washington, which was mentioned earlier, reports a startling growth in recruiting employers. Mrs. Marion Coombs, Director of Student Employment and Graduate Placement at Howard, states, "We scheduled 200 employer visits in 1961-62 compared with a previous high of 50. The net result is that Howard University can place all of its graduates in science, math, accounting, engineering, social work, pharmacy, and education in spite of problems of racial discrimination on the labor market." Julius A. Thomas, National Urban League, makes this statement. "There's been a terrific demand for people with scientific and technical training in all of the sciences. Negroes have moved into many corporations as engineers, draftsmen, technicians, chemists, laboratory assistants, and so forth. Government agencies involved in various kinds of scientific and technical research have employed a large number of Negro college graduates. Unfortunately, however, we are not turning out very many young people with good backgrounds in the sciences, and this is a major problem when we talk about Negro employment with representatives of our corporate contracts. In a recent article in another popular education journal, the Saturday Evening Post, Louis Lomax, author of the stirring book The Negro Revolt, speaks out under the title, "Young Negroes Aren't Ready." He says, "The generation of young Negroes that is doing so much to win new opportunities for itself is ill-equipped to use those opportunities. With splendid courage, these youngsters are breaking down barriers of prejudice, yet they are not qualified for the new jobs in industry and government now open to them. Even worse, Negro students often fail to show even a desire to get ahead. The need is crystal clear to any Negro who is courageous enough to be honest about our problem. The Negro community must launch crash programs, which might be called study-ins, that involve both vocational guidance and academic preparation. Another vital step in preparing students for the reality of today's job market is to overhaul the curricula of Negro colleges. For their course of study is usually much too narrow for today's job demands. Personnel officers from the nation's major industries visit Negro college campuses each year in search of talent, but their visits are largely in vain because Negro students have neither been motivated toward nor trained in the sciences, an area beyond the limits of the exclusively Negro world. Otis E. Finley, Jr. put it this way: "Our job now is to help our students leapfrog over generations of neglect and frustration into the age of astronauts, automation, cybernetics, and mass communication. If I could find them, Finley concluded, we could place thousands of Negroes in decent-paying, integrated jobs. The cause lies in the training of both the students and the faculty on Negro campuses. But the students are neither stupid nor irreparably mangled. These students can be taught and can be inspired, provided both teachers and students enter into a covenant of good scholarship for the sake of the race and the nation as a whole. This again involves study-ins, remedial courses to correct high school deficiencies, vocational guidance to broaden the professional horizons of Negro students, accelerated and expanded academic courses to prepare them for competition in general American society. Study-in, of course, means hard work for both student and faculty. But although you wouldn't suspect it while walking through some of our Negro college campuses, and I don't think there need to be any restriction made here, this is what a college is supposed to be about. Some corrective steps are now being taken. The United Negro College Fund is administering a $300,000 faculty fellowship which assists Negro college teachers, particularly those working in the sciences, to earn their doctorate degrees. More locally, within Los Angeles, through the efforts of Bob Singleton in our graduate division, Bill Leuterman, graduate in education, Presbyterian minister Donald Hartsook, there has been inaugurated a program locally called STEP, which stands for Student Educational Tutorial Project, in which graduate and indeed undergraduate students in the university and others in the community are undertaking tutorial efforts to upgrade the education of young Negro Americans in the community. Through the enterprise of a Los Angeles chemist in the research division of the Rexall Drug Company, William Slayton, Jr., programs of community weekend workshops have been inaugurated to train Negro American youth in science, modern mathematics, and similar fields. And the recent issue of Ebony had described and pictured the weekend conference at the university's Lake Arrowhead Conference Center, which Slayton and his associates and a busload or more of his young charges spent a most profitable time. A news release from the Ford Foundation of just last Thursday, October 10th, described a recent grant of $600,000 for professional education designed to prepare able minority group students, especially those in Negro colleges, for careers in the Foreign Service and other foreign affairs agencies. The new program, to be administered by Howard University, will select 100 foreign affairs scholars over the next 4 years and award them $4,000 fellowships for a year's study at graduate schools throughout the country. The grant also provides funds for identifying and counseling candidates for financial help with tuition and living costs at summer orientation programs prior to the fellowship year and for administrative expenses. The American Council on Education is holding a small conference on October 17th to 18th at the end of this week to formulate a program to be sponsored by the Council with foundation support for expanding opportunities for Negroes in higher education at the undergraduate and graduate level as faculty members and as administrators in all regions of the country. The activity grew out of a recent meeting of President Kennedy with higher education representatives at which he requested they take the initiative along these lines. The American Council of Graduate Schools, whose founder and president is your Professor Emeritus Dean Arlt, who for many years was Dean of the Graduate Division here, at its meeting in Washington this December, is planning a panel discussion on the Negro in graduate school. Dean Beach of Vanderbilt University in Nashville will open the session, introduce a representative from the Woodrow Wilson Foundation who will describe the program of assistance to Negroes which has been operating for 2 years now to enable them to repair some of the deficiencies in their undergraduate training. I will then call, he says, on 2 distinguished Negro scholars, a scientist and a humanist, to say what they wish about the needs to be done, and then go on to the balance of the program. As Professor Golino remarked, steps have even been initiated here at UCLA. And I quote from a recent news release in the Western edition of the New York Times, entitled Rights at the Top. With equal rights for Negroes a burning national issue, the University of California at Los Angeles has made an announcement that serves as a reminder that the educational problem is not only one of coming to grips with slum schools on the lowest educational level. The university, in order to help train more Negro students in graduate and professional fields, is launching a drive to find qualified prospects for enrollment in graduate courses. It quotes, "If the number of Negroes entering the university teaching and research is to be increased, the process must begin by expanding the enrollment of qualified Negro students at the graduate level," Dr. Franklin D. Murphy, Chancellor of the institution, said. At first, the major effort will be aimed at the undergraduates already enrolled at UCLA. Later, the search will be carried beyond the campus with the aid of civic agencies in the Negro community. High schools and junior colleges will also be combed for students who, given the chance and encouragement, promise to do well in graduate studies. If then education of the Negro American has been through 3 stages of progress in this country, the first of which developed the muscles of his back, the second of which trained his hands, and the culminating stage of which has been devoted to the cultivation of his mind and brain, we appear at last to have caught up with the great view of William Du Bois. With your help, California, and more particularly UCLA, will do everything possible to make his vision real. Thank you.
We are going to have a question period if you like to ask Dr. Magoun some questions. Before we go into that, may I remind you once again of next week's lecture. Professor Kitano will speak on the problem of the Japanese minority as a pattern for integration, as an exemplary pattern for integration. Remember, the meeting will be held in room 100, Moore Hall. Now, are there any questions?
Please, I'd like, don't you think that the adoption by the Negro leadership of the Booker T. Washington policy 50 years ago as against the Du Bois policy held back the struggle of the Negro people for this close to a half a century? That his history has shown us that if they had adopted the Du Bois policy then, the Negro struggle would have been well advanced today.
I think there is something to be. The question is whether the development of Washington's program for the industrial education of the Negro may not have retarded and held back the development of Negro American education over the past period since. I think there may well be something in this, though I have a feeling that both of these views were quite right in their place, and the difficulty perhaps came in adopting the one without the other. This perhaps represented natural stages in social and educational evolution. In any case, we have built right into our master plan for higher education here in California today provisions both for vocational training in the terminal vocational programs of our two-year junior colleges, as well as a transfer program through the junior college, the state college, to the graduate and professional activities of the campuses of the University of California. I think the spectrum is together is the ideal arrangement, and it may well be that coming, as was the case, with one part of it alone, and then belatedly the addition of the other was really the handicapping feature.
Yet we still see it in the Los Angeles Board of Education, their adoption of the regulations the other day. They still, in the Negro community, tend to train towards industrialization. The teaching quality in the Negro community is very poor. The attempt by the Negroes to do something about it has been retarded even recently.
I saw in the paper 2 days ago what seemed to be the cheering news that the House of Representatives had passed out a bill for a $3 billion program supporting the vocational training activities in the public school systems of this country, which will in large part, I gather, be directed toward ethnic minority groups. Hopefully the current situation may improve. Please. May I introduce Marcus McBroom, whose help I wish to acknowledge in my own acquaintance with this situation, and who, as president of the Panhellenic Council in this city and in other activities, has done a great deal in this direction.
It's certainly nice being here. I want to thank Dean Magoun for this opportunity to say something to you. I have some other views, other than those he expressed, of course, but I think it should be significant to point out, number one, there was a period in which Dr. Du Bois and Booker T. Washington cooperated. Number two, it should be pointed out, despite its inadequacy, the LA Board of Education has appropriated $737,500 for compensatory education. They have also set up several other important things that we are very interested in the Negro community, and I've attended all of their meetings since January, but about 2 or 3, I think about 3. And I didn't attend the one today because of this meeting. The thing that we are still marching about and demonstrating about in Los Angeles as pertains to education is that so far as the Negro leadership is concerned, the LA Board of Education has done nothing about integrating the Los Angeles schools essentially. It has set up what is called an open transfer policy. Namely, those Negro parents who can afford it can transfer their youngsters to Hollywood High or some other high school. I think this should be clarified. This is one of the major things that we're still demonstrating about. We're very concerned about the Birchers, the American Nazis, and other people who are very much in evidence, by the way, at the Board of Education, who want to send Negroes back to Africa, who have all kinds of wild, projected ideas about the dangers of little girls being ravished and so forth. These are the things, and you'd be quite shocked about some of this. I might say, incidentally, as a former student, and perhaps we will be back here again very shortly, I'm a former graduate student of the university here, and my wife was the first Negro student accepted into the medical school. The thing that Dean Magoun has been doing, and I mean doing it with a humility that is deeply touching. I've had lunch with him on several occasions. It is a magnificent advance that they're now trying to say, as opposed to some of the things that happened with several professors when I was here, that they do see the problem. But as the gentleman pointed out, the problem begins at the roots, in the elementary schools. You must, let me say one word further. The problem in the Negro community, first we have ghetto schools. And as most of you know, education takes two essential forms. One is called a general high school education, which was considered quite adequate for the, quote, average American. We're going to finish high school, get a high school diploma, and that was it. Well, since the advent of Sputnik, as most of you know, that isn't it. And there is also what is known as the academic program, which involves language, science, mathematics, etc. Now, in the Negro community, starting out with this matter of mathematics, which is the queen of the sciences and the basis to scientific advance, we do not have, because, quote, of the beginning with the Stanford-Binet test, which, as most of you know, those of you who are psychologists, which has what is called a high verbal facility, which means that many Negro youngsters, many Mexican youngsters are tagged retarded before they even began. And consequently, they are filling up so-called custodial schools. I have taught in these schools. I have done a year's research under Dr. McLean of this faculty in one of those schools. And of course, the Negro youngsters, many of them who never get a chance to get out of those schools. And this is the thing that we are screaming about. We feel that in many ways, they are making us a nation of drones, and we are objecting to it. Now, let some of you hasten, some of you who want to stand for proficiency in psychological testing. I hasten with humility to remind you that Einstein flunked his math in high school, that Thomas Edison was kicked out of the, Dean tells me that so that he and I, as you know, he's one of the most outstanding men we have in brain physiology today in the country, in the world for that matter. I hasten to remind you also, Edison is some dispute as to whether it was the third grade or the fifth grade. He was put out of school as being, quote, too ignorant to learn anything. And of course, he gave us our electric light, to say nothing of Dr. George Washington Carver, who was told to stick to laundry work. And if you don't mind a personal reference, my wife, who very recently made an original contribution in the research of heart disease, was told she should go into domestic science and cooking. So I think this is just a little background. Perhaps we could get some additional questions and some other information might develop, and I'd be very happy to give you some of the feeling we have from the firing line, as it were, if you like.
Marcus, ask me a question. Please. Can someone from the school system answer this question?
I can answer that. I might say that they want to know, the question is, are there any honor programs? Jordan High School, which is in the heart of the ghetto, which the Los Angeles Board of Education, by the way, has appropriated some $1 million to, quote, improve, there is an honor program there. But here again, you have this problem that I alluded to a moment ago. You see, in order to open a class, there must be so many students who request that class. This is what I was talking about when I talked about the academic program. Now, if you do not have students who request the class, and they say therefore they cannot afford to send a teacher to this school, you see the problem that develops immediately. And only after we started demonstrations did the board publicize its, quote, transfer policy. And incidentally, part of this idea is at Southgate, despite all the confusion in the newspapers, where they do have honor programs, where they do have empty classrooms, we have been saying, why in the name of heaven do you try to keep Negro youngsters on half-day sessions? The buses are sitting idle outside the school. Why not transfer the Negro students over to Southgate High School? Now, an interesting legal problem has also developed in a suit which is now pending before the Superior Court of California here in Los Angeles, based on the Supreme Court decision to which the dean mentioned, and the Jackson case, or what is may be referred to as the Pasadena case, that a Negro student has a right to a balanced or equal education at Jordan High School as well as Southgate High School. And this will be, the Board of Education has promised to present a plan on December the 1st, and the Judge Gettleson has promised he will make a ruling on it on or about January the 15th. Now that is, incidentally, the California case dean has gone one step beyond the Supreme Court and saying that a Negro, first we know that there's no such thing as separate but equal. That in the United States, where we have multiple racial groups, for an individual to be properly educated, the California Supreme Court has said he has a right to be exposed to other ethnic persons. And therefore we talk about balanced faculties, balanced student bodies. And of course we will only get the kind of, and I want you to see this, I want to stress again on this open transfer policy. And I want to, incidentally, when I spoke about Einstein and others, we've had 3 Negro Rhodes Scholars in the United States. The late Dr. Alain Locke, another young man who is in Pennsylvania, and believe it or not, from the cesspool of the Negro ghetto, a young Negro, Doug Saunders, who's at Oxford right now, if I'm not mistaken. So you see, we don't know who is there. And it just happened some of the teachers saw him, recognized him, and encouraged him. But we do not have this essential kind of overall honor program, because the science courses and other things are not given at some of these places. Now I have a terrible confession to make if I get the gist of your question. You see?
I think that, yes. I'd like to say something with regard to that. I taught at Fremont High School some years ago in 1950, when the school was not completely Negro. I think at that time it was about a third Negro. I was appointed there, and I was first on the list in there. Now, that happened to be one of the 2 or 3 schools that had an opening, and I was sent there. I did not stay there because I was in excess. At that time, the population, we were getting the depression babies, and we had a lower number of high school students than we have today. But many of the people that I knew at Fremont High School, let's be quite fair about this, are still there. Very fine teachers. They are white teachers. They've been there for many years, and they are discouraged because the school has filled up with Negroes. Many of them, they tell me, are young people sent out of the South by their families and living with grandmothers, other relatives, bewildered, underprepared, many of them 3rd and 4th grade readers. This is a very complicated problem. And the teacher tends, unfortunately, whether a good or a poor teacher, however you define those terms, to give up. The teacher is human. This is an overwhelming problem. And I think that we must be quite fair about this. Now, I think what you've said is true, that most of the Negro teachers, we were investigating this problem as far back as 1950. Why did they all go downtown? And we got the same answer from Mr. Brown, that they were sent nearest their homes. Of course, I was not sent near my home. I lived in Westwood, and I was sent down to Fremont. So obviously, this is not the correct answer. But there is a very complicated problem
Yes.
here that I think we have to...
Well, let me just add to that. This is a complicated problem. Apparently what she is saying has often happened. She was low man on totem pole, so she was probably sent over. But I assure...
First on the list.
I'm saying as a new teacher, I'm talking about low man on totem pole. Also, many of the Negro schools have a extremely rapid turnover of teachers. Not discouraged or anything. Another thing that really disgusts me, if you don't mind my being very blunt about it, is many white people are talking about 300 years of beatings, scarrings, frustrations, and what have you. And I myself know many doctors that were PhDs I'm talking about, who were hustling bags at Penn Station, waiting tables and so forth and so on. And suddenly now we are confronted with a situation that I think the very life of a nation is concerned with, is involved here, not just saving the Negro, as it were. And then we complain because Negroes come up with bruises on their backs, don't you see? And it's not just the fact that Negroes do not want to learn. I think one of the most amazing things, and I'll cite two examples to prove my point, that the reason the majority of Negroes have not become communists, the reason I think the majority of Negroes have not become Muslims, is because they do have faith and confidence basically in you that are sitting right out there. Yes, this gentleman here.
Please. Try it again.
My question is that, do you think that the people, that the Negroes themselves have failed to adapt an identity within themselves so that you might stimulate themselves to be unstrapped?
I think this is doubtless true of a number of people in the Negro American category, as one can identify through the spectrum of our society. I don't think that this is true for Negroes generally, no.
May I just add to that? I think, number one, the white American society tells the Negro he is nothing. He is from nothing. He is little black Sambo. He is a boy. As a matter of fact, you go into any, and you consider now that the majority of Negroes lived in the South till very, very recently. If you want to go into this a little further on an academic level, I suggest you read Caste and Class in a Southern Town by Dr. Dollard of Harvard, among other books. You will see that they have told the Negro, in terms of all the means of mass communication, through films, through books, through everything else, that he's a step infected. He's scratching his head and so forth. He's a boy. He is, I read Myths of the Negro Past for Herskovitz. He is grinning. He is oversexed. He's like a child and so on. And unfortunately, in the home and everywhere else, this idea prevails. And I think all of us know, if we know anything about psychoanalysis, there's something involved here called the ego ideal. I think part of the current upsurge of Negro nationalism and feeling has to do with the rise and upsurge of people like Nkrumah of Ghana, Sukuturi of Guinea, where you do begin to see Negroes standing for something, representing nations and so on. And all I'm saying is where I know myself, and I don't want to go in too much detail here, where you see your father who suffers and works and then is working as a bellhop or a Pullman porter despite his degrees. Or if you want to get more brutal about it, my own wife, who became a specialist in internal medicine and cardiology here at this university, goes out to Gardena to get a job, and the director of the clinic won't even talk to her because she's a Negro woman, first challenging her credentials. It becomes quite obvious why there's not this tremendous upsurge of feeling and pride and so on.
I think this
Yes.
gentleman had a question earlier.
Yeah, we're back to the school immigration problem. Your proposal takes us to the high school students, the Negro high school students, from the predominantly Negro high schools in Los Angeles, to put them in a higher socioeconomical high school. It wouldn't matter whether they were black or white. The people in the different socioeconomical levels wouldn't accept them anyway.
What is your question? Sorry, would you mind starting again? There was a little commotion.
What is being done to capture the dropouts from high school? Certainly, among this group, there must be some good grades, and because of economic or other conditions, they've had to drop out. And I'm thinking of the colored students.
Is there anyone from the STEP program here this evening? This is designed, as I understand it, in is there? Please. Could you respond to this question, please?
But well, how about the university program?
Please, would you tell us about it?
I know the UCLA is going next year. I'm pretty sure this has been published. A lot of information that UCLA is going to take some of the kids who have shown promise but who have dropped out, give them an intensive training program during the summer with teachers, I guess, from UCLA, and then admit them to the university without having had a high school diploma in the first place. And they're going to go ahead and finance the kids' education here. As far as the student program goes, Student Tutorial Education Project is right now kind of disbanded and is working in several different colleges. UCLA, there's a group of about 150 students working with kids who are probably potential dropouts in the elementary school basis on a one-to-one tutoring basis. Where you have a kid who's in the high school and who can't read at the 5th or 6th grade level, working one teacher with 30 kids. You can do much better when you have one, perhaps college student who isn't even trained, just trying to act as a motivational factor with one high school kid. There's also a group working in East LA, that's a group from Occidental. This summer there was a group working at Manual Arts. These are all college kids, and this is, there's such a tremendous number of college kids who are sitting around doing nothing, twiddling their thumbs and talking about sex. If you could put these people to work,
sooner or later, we'll always get around.
I would like to know if there are any attempts being made to increase the number of qualified Negroes in our state college here in California as well as the University of California. I'd like to know if it's not being too presumptuous, the number of Negroes on the faculty of UCLA.
I can't answer your last question, nor can I estimate the number of Negro students who are here at UCLA, either as undergraduates or graduate or professional students. As in all state-supported, public-supported institutions, we keep no records of race, creed, or color, nor are there photographs nor other documents available. Professor Wendell Jones in our School of Education has been enormously helpful to me in filling in my own lacuna in this field. He, I might mention incidentally, received one of the Outstanding Teaching Awards at the faculty convocation at the beginning of the fall. And I mention him as an example of a splendid Negro-American faculty member at UCLA. Sorry,
yes.
Could we let some of the other people ask questions?
With respect to what the Negro has suffered up through the decades, I think this is a very good time to comment on the grandson of Du Bois. I think he was a grandson, the recently deceased W.E.B. Du Bois, who certainly you know who he is.
I know very well.
This was you
I'll
made
bet you that there are not more than about 0.01% of college professors know who he is, and he made one of the greatest contributions to not only American history but to particularly the Negro history. And he died about 2 weeks ago. He was serving in Ghana. I mentioned.
This is the same William
that's
Du
right,
Bois.
I wanted to mention to you that Du Bois, to whom the dean referred, died on August the 27th, 1963 at 95 in Accra, Ghana. And they held a state funeral for him.
Make a few comments about him. I think certainly he's worthy of comment.
If I may interfere just for 1 second, I would like to see if there are any other questions from any other people.
Please.
I would like to know whether the dean wouldn't recommend the exchange program in high schools between African high schools and American high schools. I think it isn't a myth between the white man and the Negro in this country. There is still myth, some type of myth between the African child and the American Negro child in this country. And I think exchange programs like this would remove some of the barriers and fears about the jungle life and some of the myths taught by television, Hollywood, and some of the stuff. I wonder whether the dean would recommend that or would endorse such ideas. The African high schools would be quite willing to take the American white children as well as the Negroes as exchange programs.
May I say a word to that? May I say a word to that? Professor Jones, Wendell Jones, was just mentioned a few minutes ago, is right now traveling through Africa for exactly that particular purpose, to try to establish some sort of contact, not only among our own white American students, but Negro American students to go to Africa and vice versa. So something is being done.
Please.
Reference was made to a compensatory program about to begin in LA.
Yes.
Could you describe that more fully?
Yes, if I may say very briefly, in the demonstrations that we've had, the ad hoc committee's report of the Los Angeles Board of Education, which is being adopted right now in the various board meetings, has 4 parts. One of them has to do with compensatory education, which I've already mentioned. $737,500 has been appropriated. And this has as its purpose the idea of remedial reading, remedial mathematics, and so on, more counselors, smaller classes. It has to do with not only the dropouts, but the push-outs and kick-outs, which we also suffer. So it does promise to be, as I said, a very fine thing. I think they need more money, but as you know, the LA Board of Education is in a financial crisis at the moment. But that is what the compensatory program is to do, is to make up for the educational depredation that has been suffered.
I think we have quizzed our speaker long enough. I know he's had a very busy day today, and it's quite late. May I again then remind you of next week's lecture, and it is in Moore Hall. Thank you and good night, ladies and gentlemen.